Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the back of the book before I start to give people an overview. And then
Sure.
I'm going to jump into chapter number 8. And I do want to say that, contrary to what Antonio was encouraging me to do, I have not read the book. I haven't even read a
Sure.
chapter. I decided I wanted to read it the way people are going to hear me read it, fresh, as if they had picked the book up themselves, opened it, and started reading. So perhaps there might be some mispronunciations of words. And
Sure.
I beg your pardon for that, Jason, and for those who will be listening to me read. But that's the beauty of when you're reading silently in your own head. You can mispronounce things all you want and no one will know.
Sure. Well,
All
thank you
right,
so
so I
much.
guess I'm going to go with start with chapter number 8. And thank you so much again, Jason, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was a real honor.
It's Jason C. Stiles, and he's in Wisconsin, and you know him as Persian Scribe. His YouTube channel is Persian Scribe, and the word Persian and Scribe is all run together. So you can find the link to his channel in the description box of this video. So I encourage you to go subscribe. And Jason, I'll talk to you later. Maybe you can even go into chat after you hang up and mix and mingle.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Really
Talk to you
appreciate it.
soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to read the back of the book to begin. And there goes Jason. Here's the book. In the 1500s, amidst the age of discovery, a young captain, Raiden Veneti, prepares to set off on an adventure beyond his wildest dreams. A charismatic Venetian merchant, he is a master of a uniquely designed ship called La Pasquala, the brainchild of a mysterious and talented man who once gave Veneti a secret key to be used at his own discretion. In the midst of the dangerous imports and export business, Veneti gets a note from the Gnostic, a man he very much respects, requesting his immediate presence. The captain and his crew are to meet him in Tarragona before month's end. The note is cryptic at best, and although Veneti senses his friend is in trouble, he heeds the call, concerns notwithstanding. Veneti cannot possibly suspect a dark presence follows him as he goes. Neither could he suspect he is about to sail from the Mediterranean to the ends of the world and beyond. La Pasquala and her crew are on a daring journey to discover a mystic truth that has been kept hidden for centuries, and no high sea experience could prepare them for this out-of-the-world thrill ride. So let's begin with the lost adventures of Captain Veneti, chapter number 8, The Inveterate Deceivers. The expansive cloister, unusually placed at the front of the main entrance at the Cathedral de Santa Maria della Suavella, was the preferred location for the young oblate to meet the prior. Either that or the arcade, both of which were outside the basilica. But the prior, a withdrawn, intense man, always seemed to demand to meet in darkness, which meant the unsettling crypt, or in this instance, the dank baptistry. As he walked through the cloister's gallery, he counted 17 ornate Gothic windows, each different from one another. His admiration for Romanesque and Gothic architecture, particularly the congruence of both styles at this cathedral in Catalonia, kept him from dwelling on his troubles. The quarter-hour bell began to ring from the inside the imposing octagonal bell tower, which meant his hour of reckoning was nearing, but there was nothing he could do to avoid it. Alonso and his fellow conscripts could not offer an explanation that the prior would accept. The Gnostic and his accomplices had avoided capture near Tarragona, and La Pasquala had not been seen in days. "We shall not be held captive by the limitations of your weak mind and apparent lack of determination. You dishonor our orders oblati," Prior Napier chastised. "I am surrounded on all sides by failure. What sustained you as the realization sank in that they had slipped from your grasp, only to exacerbate your woeful state of affairs by returning here, as opposed to continuing your efforts?" "My faith sustained me, Prior Napier," Alonso dutifully proclaimed, thinking if he could give the proper response that it would result in a reprieve. The prior laughed. "Having faith is pretending to know something when you do not," he thought. "If they knew what I know, the entire order of our pliable, God-fearing society would unravel. Deception is what sustains me. Maintaining this facade nourishes me. These poor men cannot even begin to perceive how the lie is different at every level of the hierarchy. What do I tell servants of the church such as these? Lies. What lies above me at the Holy See? Probably a bigger lie. And above us all, the biggest lie never to be known. Very well. Return to the Abbasia Lyri and resume your studies and daily prayers. The prior relented. The effectiveness of his retinue was clearly in retrograde, but any further display of contempt toward these naive men would be banal. The prior's thoughts turned back to the whereabouts of the map and the progress of Captain Tarsh. He knew that La Suevela had provided cover for his clandestine activities, as it often did, but it was necessary to leave the cathedral and its officials to travel the short distance to the annex so as not to draw any suspicions. Moreover, he did not want the unruly, clamorous movements of Captain Tarsh's men to reveal the location of the causeway leading to the entrance. Leaving the baptistry, the prior was intent on preparing for his journey later in the day. But as he walked through the open arcade on the way back to his room, Brother Vila waved his arm from across the gallery of the cloister to attract the prior's attention and approached hurriedly. Sorry, cats. Crashing. Leaving the baptistry, the prior was intent on preparing for his journey later in the day. But as he walked through the open arcade on the way back to the room, Brother Vila waved his arm from across the gallery of the cloister to attract the prior's attention and approached hurriedly. Prior Napier, Friar Costa would like to know if you will be attending service this afternoon, Brother Vila asked, bowing his head to show reverence to his superior. We must always be disposed to God. Could you inform the friar that I will, and that I appreciate his attentiveness? The prior answered. The numbing repetition of rituals deadened the minds of the obedient masses and trained them to unconsciously accept anything without much resistance. The cycles of the moon and sun, the Gregorian calendar, invented holidays, anything that created a predictable, fixed orientation and reinforced officialdom's predetermined narrative was vital to the system of control. To that end, the daily schedules and all the other mundane tasks performed were necessary for the order. But he cherished the freedom he felt from any time spent outside the diocese. Expressing such thoughts even to someone like the jovial friar, who was known to enjoy libations while mingling with his parishioners in the town below, was not in Prior Napier's nature. As his knowledge and influence grew over the past few years, so did his feelings of superiority and isolation. Being able to calculate the motivations of others became easier, but his ability to feel empathy toward them diminished. As twilight fell across Leda, the prior quietly left the basilica unannounced and began the brisk, hour-long hike among the mountainside to the annex. Napier began to think about how one man was changing the world with only the power of his unparalleled creative mind. The radical influence of Leonardo and the impact of his work on future generations could not be fully anticipated. But the prior and others in the church were prepared to spark a revolution of their own. To nullify the effects of any new way of thinking, it would be necessary to infiltrate it and control it from within. This strategy had long been understood and repeatedly implemented by those in power. In the next few years, the church planned to covertly usher into the public domain a shift from God to man, from religion to materialistic science. The world would no longer be a static plane of existence. Instead, it would be sent spinning around an unseen axis of constant change and hurtling through the heavens at such a breakneck speed that it would be impossible for anyone to comprehend the truth with a new priesthood. Science and its new clergy could become a new religion, governed by a hierarchy of experts who decided which was fact and which was hearsay, based on a strict dogma of methods and procedures that only investigated what was deemed acceptable by the hierarchy and focused on quelling any dissent by force or mockery and ridicule. The beauty of the shift to materialistic theory and observation was that it could create a worldwide worldview that changed quickly or adapted slowly, depending on the circumstances, so the liars could always hide behind different lies. The pace at which new information or opposing ideas was disseminated would be controlled, and if anyone challenged the orthodoxy, they would risk being ostracized, ignored, or worse. Any areas of research arising outside of the conventional structure would be quickly marginalized and easily discredited. Leonardo, despite his brilliance, and other inventive men like him, were typically too focused on their work to be able to counteract the strategy of controlled opposition. To his relief, Captain Tarsh and some of his crew were finally in sight, and they had remembered to subtly signal the prior with the light of a single torch. It took Prior Napier a few minutes to reach their elevated position along the side of the mountain, and as he drew closer, he slowed his pace to catch his breath. Captain Tarsh, I am pleased to see you. I hope your efforts have not been in vain, Prior Napier said. We have done what you asked, the imposing Captain Tarsh replied. The captain's deeply abrasive voice hung heavily in the air and was fitting for a man who had spent nearly 40 years sailing perilous seas and striking fear into the hearts of thousands of men. Silver streaks in his black shoulder-length hair and beard, along with weathered dark circles under his eyes, were the only visible indications that time had touched the hardened captain. He had maintained his muscular build, and despite his age, looked vigorous, unlike some of his haggard crew. Their gaunt expressions and thewless demeanor were most likely a function of poor diet, but enduring the exhausting demands of a tyrannical captain certainly extracted a toll. Do you have the map? The prior asked. I've sent Adnan and Ikmel to the door with the pages that Di Stefano procured. You should recognize their faces, Captain Tarsh tersely explained. One of Tarsh's men spoke to the prior about the emissary who Napier had sent to apprehend the curator and chronicled the manner in which Di Stefano executed his escape. The curator's disappearance vexes me, but he's been a liability since his failure on Malta. I should not be surprised by the poisonous denials of his betrayal. What should I do with him? Prior Napier asked, his well-recompensed mercenary. He's done what we have asked. His duties were numerous, Tarsh replied. Every man has a breaking point. He reached his. The prior was reluctant to accept this simplistic view, but Tarsh was not someone who would suffer lengthy debate, especially when it involved matters out of his purview. You're probably right. He knows he cannot hide from us for long. And what of the boy, Ingo Lopez? The lit souls await his arrival. We have him and the other children as well, Captain Tarsh answered. Now that we have the map, we will be able to squelch any further rumors of its existence. Your interdictions will see to that, the prior assured him. Captain Tarsh did not necessarily believe that the prior was only interested in obscuring the map's existence. He knew that there were darker, esoteric motivations driving the prior to obsession. He often wondered about the treasured secret Napier was skillfully hiding. It could not merely be trinkets from a long-forgotten civilization, or a strange portolan created by a painter's apprentice turned inventor. Why did he expend so much time and resources attempting to find an Egyptian Gnostic and an insignificant merchant gallery? The actions of a few scattered truth-seekers could hardly be a threat to the harlot of Rome, the captain's unsavory name given to the Queen of Heaven faction that ruled the Vatican and worshipped the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, Egyptian goddess Isis, Virgin Mary, all of which were names given to the same invented deity. Unsatisfied by the substantial wealth he had accumulated by being the prior's sanctioned enforcer and marauder, Captain Tarsh had long ago devised a plan to exert his powerful influence in the Mediterranean and wrest control of the obscurantist order in their quarry. But he would not act brashly, as he would have done in his youth, until he knew more. The captain had to be sure he could manipulate the Knights Hospitaller to accept his takeover, and he recognized that the actions of the Knights of Solomon were even more unpredictable. Navigating the high seas drew no comparison to navigating the black seas of the inveterate deceivers within the church. So that concludes chapter number 8 of this book, The Lost Adventures of Captain Veneti. I'd like to read more.
Yes.
But I don't know if I should.
Yes.
I
See what people say. I say yes.
All right, let's look into chat and let's see if put a Y if you'd like me to read the next chapter called The Shroud and the Labyrinth, and put a
Yes, definitely, says Nathan.
Or shall we leave it for someone to go purchase the book at this point?
Why, Marco, David, why, everybody's saying why.
All right, I will read another chapter of this wonderful book. I know I'm pronouncing some of the words and names incorrectly, but please forgive me, and sorry for the cats knocking things over midway through the chapter. Kind of threw me off a little. Let me have a little sip of my coffee, and we will go with chapter number 9. This is fun. And reading a book out loud makes you really think about, when you listen to those books on tape, how many takes they must have to do and have it cut up in pieces to get it perfectly. Or maybe they just are perfect readers.
Persian scribe says you're pronouncing it properly.
Persian scribe says I'm pronouncing it properly. He's only being kind. All right, here we go with chapter number 9, The Lost Adventures of Captain Veneti, Persian scribe's book, Jason C. Styles. We begin. I almost forgot how much I like holding you, Sandro quietly mused, as he once again declared his undying affection for his modified halberd, which had an apical spike, dented blade, and an extended shaft to better suit the big man's height. Lord and Savior, what is wrong with you? Corsair asked. You are mawkishly talking to that unwieldy thing like it's your lover, and with each slow caress, I can feel a churn in my stomach. Be quiet, you two, Raiden scolded as he adjusted his cloak. I could ask you to explain why you brought the grill falcon. You know how he hates confined spaces. In a couple of hours, it'll be dark. We have no time to waste. Captain Tarsh and the Prior will be arriving here soon. The Pasqualians had followed Tarsh and his men, although the acclativious Catalonian mountains and valleys for the better part of the previous day, and managed to outflank their position by mid-afternoon using the map. Raiden suspected that Tarsh was taking a circuitous route to the annex in order to conceal the stronghold's location from any prying eyes. This provided the opportunity the group needed to find the colossal door and secretly infiltrate the annex. As they neared the area that concealed the Leary annex, the group found a rocky path that wound along the mountains. Raiden gave a hand signal to Jolly and Wu to head up the narrowing mountain pass and peer around the corner of the incline to look for the cave complex. Using his father's map, Raiden theorized the causeway would be found within this southernmost cave. Jolly spotted 2 men nearing the exact cave and motioned for Raiden and the others to hurry up to his position. They're carrying something, Corsair observed with his keen eyesight. Gironi sees it too. Your winged friend seems to be trying to tell you something, Corsair, Wu said. Don't look at me like that, bird. You know I saw it first, Corsair scolded. He then suggested the idea of commanding Gironi to fly over and torment the men, creating a distraction that would allow the group to approach the cave without detection and overwhelm their target. Raiden deliberated the idea with the Gnostic and decided to let the bird serve a purpose beside providing entertainment to his cousin. Corsair gave the Gyr Falcon a command to attack Tarsh's men, but no one knew if Gironi could understand it, and if he did, whether he would obey his human handler. They must have the map. I think Tarsh is eager to deliver it to the Prior and return to his ship. He's never been one to linger on solid ground. If we can retrieve the missing pages without engaging Tarsh himself, we will possibly have enough time to search for the shroud inside the annex. The group hurried to cover ground, mindful to remain unseen, as Gironi circled over the men and began performing steep dives and ascents meant to distract and pester. What was that? Aiden asked as he spun around to look at Ikmel, who was trailing behind, carrying a small wooden chest. Watch out, he shouted, as Gironi nearly clawed at Ikmel's head from behind. It's a bird of prey, Ikmel yelled in excitement. Tarsh's trusted first mate Aiden and purser Ikmel were more curious than unnerved by Gironi's assault. Crew members of the Nav Phantasma were no strangers to peril. What is it doing? Ikmel asked as he set the chest on the ground to unsheath his side sword and assume a more defensive posture. Both men looked skyward and were transfixed by the Gyr Falcon's display of hostility. Suddenly, Raiden and Corsair lunged toward the men from behind and knocked them unconscious with a couple of rocks. The group quietly celebrated their small victory and could not believe their eyes. Jolly opened the small chest with his knife to reveal the missing pages of the lost map. Fortune seems to favor us, my friends, the Gnostic happily proclaimed. His piercing blue eyes almost teared up, and the passion he felt at having the map in his hands energized the group to resume their journey toward the Leary Annex. How many men guard the inside? Sandro asked, hoping for the opportunity to show Wu how effective his halberd could be in close combat. The plan is to remain hidden. We are not gladiators entering a coliseum, Sandro, Corsair admonished. Alto, now that we have the entire map, take a look to see if it indicates an exit from the annex other than the entrance, Raiden suggested as they resumed their course toward the door. It would seem unlikely, but I wonder, mumbled Alto as he arranged the pages of the map and began the conjunction process Epo had instructed. Did you find something? Raiden asked. The group stopped at the cave entrance to light a torch and used the remaining ambient light to look at what Alto had found on the map. I've been looking at this map for such a long time, but I'm seeing it with new eyes now. I learned more from Ipo in one night than I did in years by myself, Alto admitted. Ah, don't blame yourself, my old friend, the Gnostic consoled. We have done our best. What have you found? Jolly asked Alto. I do not think there is another way in or out nearby, but maybe down, Alto theorized, as he pointed to a line that seemed to lead deep underneath the mountain stronghold, following a path southward to a mountain a few miglia away. Even if we can find what is on this map from inside the annex, how do we know that it is a way out? Complained Corsair, who was beginning to doubt the wisdom of infiltrating such a mysterious place. This is a fool's errand, Raiden. We have the map. Let us take leave of this place, while fortune, as the monk just said, still favors us. No, Corsair, we need to investigate this place for any clues that might reveal the whereabouts of Ellery, the Gnostic implored. And the shroud could provide invaluable as well. We don't even know what its true purpose is, or what we could learn from it. I agree with the monk. We're going in, Raiden commanded confidently. Master, the light is leaving us, Wu said to the Gnostic. Of course, our course is set. Let us brave the darkness, Raiden said, finally convincing Corsair of the merits of pushing forward into the stronghold. The cave had a narrow, damp entrance that gently sloped downward for hundreds of feet and led to a cavernous room. Corsair seemed distracted by leaving Gironi behind. The confinement of a cave was no place for a gear falcon, especially this particular temperamental bird, but Sandro convinced Corsair to relax and push forward. One by one, they entered the dark space and looked for any indication of an entrance into the stronghold. We might not be in the correct cave, Alto suggested. I was certain this would lead us to the door, Raiden stated. Maybe we missed something along the way. Is there a color darker than black? Corsair joked. Sandro and Jolly laughed briefly until Raiden's torch flickered and was almost extinguished. A flow of musty air, made obsolete by time, could be felt above where Raiden was standing. And if not for that, the sculptured stone stairway, which was concealed by a large boulder, would have gone unnoticed. A resolute silence fell over the group as they began ascending up the spiraling stairway. Look, a causeway, Jolly excitedly whispered to Raiden, who was only a couple of steps behind the Persian scribe. As they reached the top of the long stairway, it became evident in Raiden's failing torchlight that the ancient causeway led to an impressive fortress. The vaulted ceilings above the causeway rose to approximately 50 feet and were reinforced by large columns with vertical fluting, reminiscent of the Doric order in Greek antiquity. Indeed, the scale of the engineering rivaled any of the great wonders of the world, and feeling compelled to document any awe-inspiring sights, Jolly hastily drew some illustrations of the Lyran architecture in his journal, while Raiden's torch was still lit. This caused him to lag behind the others along the level causeway, but as was often the case, Jolly felt it necessary to move more cautiously than his fellow crew members. Raiden's torch expired, leaving the group to walk in utter blackness for a few moments, until he said, "Everyone stop." He outstretched his arms to prevent anyone from moving past his position. The captain picked up a handful of dirt and pebbles and threw it forward. The small stones reverberated as they fell down into a deep space. "I don't have a good feeling about going that way," Corsair said, pointing out the obvious. Wu Ji asked Raiden how he knew there was a chasm merely a few feet ahead. Speaking for his cousin, Corsair answered, "That is why he is our captain, Woozy. Instincts and great hair." "You said it was my handsome face a couple of weeks ago. Now it's my hair?" Raiden joked. "We need the torch lit. Does anyone have?" the Gnostic asked. Alto remembered that he had a few matches in his leather pouch. Raiden wrapped the torch with more cloth, and once light was restored, the group peered down the decline and saw how close they had come to falling to their deaths. "Look, Captain, there are a series of footprints heading off in that direction," Sandro whispered, pointing at the ground. "This must be the way," the Gnostic added as he surveyed Sandro's discovery. "The causeway seems to veer around that wall in front of us." "Does anyone else feel like they're suddenly in a labyrinth?" Alto asked. "The Minotaur was slain, right?" Corsair quipped. After briefly explaining the unsettling story of the labyrinth and its beastly residents to Wu, he asked, "Woozy, do you have any string under all those garments? We may need to retrace our steps out of this place." Raiden curiously and cautiously led the group around the curving wall, but stopped short of turning the corner completely. The causeway had changed in its quality and dimension to reveal a marble design underneath, a clear indication to him that they were nearing the colossal door. The captain quickly extinguished the torch and tapped his index finger on his temple. The group fell in line behind him, drew their weapons, and waited for Raiden to make his move. "I see the door, and there's a ladder for some reason," Raiden whispered to the Gnostic. "There appears to be only one guard posted, but it lies 50 feet in front of us with nothing obstructing his line of sight. If we approach, he will certainly see us." "Are you sure there's only one man? He must have some way of warning others," Corsair asked. "Perhaps, or perhaps not. You have to remember that a key is required to enter, and I suspect they have not yet had too many uninvited visitors over the years, given how difficult it was to find this place and how few people live in this region," the Gnostic suggested. "We need a distraction. Sandro, how far can you throw Corsair?" Raiden mischievously asked. "If Garoni were here, he could have flown over." "Quiet," the captain interjected. "The guard is now standing. I think he heard us." The group stood still behind the rock wall, waiting for the man to make his move. Wu eased his way past Sandro and Corsair and tugged on Raiden's sleeve, pointing to a small combustible fire rocket that he had hidden in a long pocket underneath his robe. Raiden nodded in approval and whispered to Alto to give Wu a match. "This will be loud. Let us hope he's alone," Raiden said. "Everyone ready?" Raiden looked at Wu and smiled as the Gnostic's apprentice lit the rocket. Whistling through the cavern's air with a high-pitched ferocity, the rocket spiraled and sparked and hit the marble ground just in front of the door guard, who fell immediately to the ground with his arms flailing in an attempt to brace him for impact. Wu's fiery distraction worked. In fact, it kept working as the rocket continued its unpredictable dance by bouncing off the walls, shooting up to the vaulted ceiling, and then finally expelling itself of energy in a fizzle next to the panicked man who was unaware of the group's advancement toward him. Raiden lit his torch again as Sandro and Corsair restrained the guard by ripping up his shirt and using it to bind his arms and legs. More important, they muffled his ability to make any additional noise by jamming some of the fabric in his mouth. The captain suggested to Sandro that he place the guard behind one of the columns where he would be out of view from an arriving Captain Tarsh and the prior. "Woo, that was great! I'm almost afraid to ask what else you're carrying," Corsair said as he glanced down the side of the apprentice's robe. "Someone must have heard that," Alto stated worriedly while studying the colossal annex door. "Yes, we must assume so, but let us concern ourselves with getting this door open first," Raiden answered. "Old one, do you see where your pendant key should go?" The door was nearly 30 feet in height and crafted in the unique shape of a half arch. In the light, they could see it was decorated with a thin layer of similarly shimmering inlaid fire opals as the ones in their key, except they were arranged in an array of various patterns. As the Gnostic brought the key in close proximity to the door, however, he had no luck in activating it or finding a keyhole. There must be a trick to it, a simple explanation. If this key was used by the curator, it should work, Alto said confidently. "Look, these patterns on the door, here and here, I've seen them before on the map. In fact, some of these correlate to numbers." "Perhaps the decorative gems are to be touched in a specific sequence, thus activating the door in some way," Jolly theorized. Yes, I think you're right, my friend," Alto replied excitedly. Raiden brought the torch closer to Alto as the man studied the map for a numbered sequence that could be identified with the annex. "These 5 numbers. It's difficult to see, but I think I found it," he said after a few moments, showing the sequence to Raiden. "And that is why they have a ladder here. Those 5 shards are at least 15 feet up, which I guess makes sense if the builders were extremely tall." "Give me the key," Raiden said. The captain quickly ascended the ladder. After touching the fire opal shards in their appropriate sequence, the Lyran door began to glow and pulse a soft blue hue. From within the awakened door, there emerged a panel. Raiden intuitively placed the key in the panel, which promptly initiated the timed opening to the stronghold. "Hurry, Raiden! Remember what Ebo said about the door only staying open for a short time," the Gnostic reminded him. The captain pulled the key out and raced back down the ladder as the others stared in amazement. The massive door closed effortlessly into the wall in the blink of an eye. The group wasted no time in hurrying across the barrier, and within mere seconds they watched the door reemerge from its position within the wall and seal them inside the annex. It made no sound, Jolly marveled. None whatsoever, Raiden affirmed. He rubbed his brow as he looked at his old friend in disbelief. To think such things were built thousands of years ago, pondered the Gnostic. Or longer, Jolly said, with eyes wide open. And it still functions as if it were built yesterday, Alto added. Our present seems to pale in comparison to their past, Raiden commented before turning his attention to the annex itself. Let us see what our future holds, or at least our near future. Come now, before our presence is known. As they moved away from the door, the group found itself in a long hallway that was adorned with tall columns on each side, similar to the ones found outside the stronghold. But this hallway was not dark. In fact, it was lit by a row of gems emitting a soft blue light, like that of the activated door. The group quietly discussed if the annex was occupied, but were soon faced with another challenge when they realized the hallway led to a point where it branched off in two distinct directions. I detest the idea of splitting up, but we have no choice. There is no telling how expansive this place is, and the Prior and Captain Tarsh will be here soon. We will have to trust that we will find our way back to one another. Until then, find the shroud and whatever else you think might help us within our journey, Raiden declared. Corsair, Sandro, and Woozy, take the narrower hallway to the left. Old One, Alto, and Jolly, you will be coming with me. Corsair, take my torch, and good luck, cousin, he said as the two groups diverged. Corsair waited for a few moments, and then turned to Sandro and Wu and said, Raiden and the others may be looking for the shroud, but we need to find the kitchen. I'm starving. Sandro laughed in agreement. Investigating hallway after hallway, without encountering anyone, the men concluded they were in a rarely used part of the annex. The trio entered a small room full of chairs and stacked tables, but found little of interest. Eventually, after a perfunctory search of a few more rooms used for storage, they descended a stairway that led to a massive room, where they discovered huge metallic contraptions connected to one another, forming a long line and lying dormant. I think they once built things here, Corsair theorized. Or destroyed, Wu suggested. Sandro strayed from the other two as his curiosity brought him to peer down a rather sizable hole in the thick marble floor. Look, he said, the large Spaniard suddenly began to fall through the crumbling floor. His survival would have been in question if not for his quick thinking to rotate his lance across the width of the collapsed opening. Corsair and Rue ran to Sandro's aid as he tenuously held onto his weapon to remain suspended over the span, and they struggled to pull the big man from his predicament. Sandro, stop kicking your legs, Corsair scolded. We have you. Pull, Woozy, pull. You weigh as much as an ox. The ox herd that formed the Magpie Bridge, Woozy complained, straining to lift his friend. Corsair and Wu finally succeeded in their efforts, but not before their arms became fatigued, and they were overwhelmed by a shortness of breath. In fact, Corsair was too bedraggled from the experience to tease Sandro about his girth and his culinary appetite, although it certainly crossed his mind to do so. Thank you, my friend, Sandro said in relief, lying on his back. You have come through for me again. Is he talking to us, or is he talking to that ridiculous weapon of his? Corsair asked Wu, who was still on his knees near the collapsed marble floor. Everyone laughed despite their exhaustion, and soon they were back on their feet again. Corsair, if not for this, I wouldn't have had a chance, Sandro stated, holding out his beloved halberd. Corsair shook his head and sighed. Lord and Savior, what were you doing over here? Corsair asked. I'm resigned to take leave of this area. It's not safe. It would seem unlikely that any of the prior subordinates came into this part of the annex. Perhaps we should turn back. Sandro told Corsair to look through the crumbled floor anyway. Through the hole, Corsair and Wu could see a stairway that hugged a wall of the strongholds, and following it down for thousands of feet, they caught their first glimpse of a causeway on what had to be the bottom of the annex structure. Could that be the subterranean exit Alto found on the lost map? Corsair thought. Unbelievable. I think you found Alto's exit, Sandro. Although until we get down there, we won't know if it's our way out or if it will be our undoing. Should we find a way to go to the stairway, or should we go back and find the captain? Sandro asked. I'm not sure how far we've walked or how long we've been separated, Who knows what Raiden and the others have found and how far they've traveled? Like the captain said, we should trust that our paths will cross again, Corsair said, in support of the idea to descend the stairway in search of the exit. Did you hear that? Wu asked Corsair and Sandro. Someone's coming this way. The scuffling of feet was clearly evident to all the men as they scrambled to conceal themselves behind the dormant metallic contrivances. They must have heard the marble crumbling and falling when Sandro slipped, Corsair posited while extinguishing his torch. Who's there? Brother Arturo, is that you? A voice asked. What have we told you about venturing into this part of the annex? If the prior learns of this, he's been very specific in his dictate. The annex guard was armed with a hand bombard, but this did not deter Wu from adroitly darting to the side and swiping the weapon from the man's hand. Wu's speed even caught Sandro and Corsair by surprise as they watched the Gnostic's apprentice artfully marshal the guard into submission with a clever succession of hand and leg blows. He needs to teach me that, Sandro said. He sounds like a bird when he fights, Corsair remarked. Sandro laughed and said, he does, but if it helps him fight like that. Corsair, I got him, Wu called out. You certainly did, Corsair said. Should I tie his hands? Wu asked. He seems to be enjoying a nap, but I suppose we should restrain him, Corsair replied, as he took the hand bombard from the unconscious guard. Where'd you learn to do that? I have been training since I was a boy, Wu answered. Master has kept me on my path. Well, I'm happy you're on our side, my friend, Corsair respectively commented. Sandro put his arm around Wu and demanded that Wu teach him the exotic form of combat as soon as possible. As they discussed this possibility, Corsair restrained the still motionless guard. Without delay, the trio moved in the direction from which the guard had come and found a hallway that led to the descending stairway they had seen earlier. The rather sizable hallway that Raiden's group followed led him to a balcony overlooking a breathtaking circular library. Standing above the floor plan, the captain's group could see the pattern of 40-foot-tall shelves organizing in concentric circles, interrupted only by offsetting pathways through the rows. Their eyes were drawn, however, from the massive metallic tome-filled shelves below the majestic stained-glass dome above, which depicted the nighttime sky of a world not known to them. A palpable lack of comprehension overwhelmed the men, and only the muffled voices of two monks in casual conversation with one another pulled their attention away from the wonderment of the dome and back to the task at hand. It was at this time that the Gnostic identified the centerpiece of the library. The shroud was displayed prominently inside a glass enclosure above the innermost circle of the shelves, where it was hanging motionless, suspended vertically by two ropes, one of which was fastened to the balcony, just beneath where Raiden was standing, and the other leading to a similar balcony across the room. The shroud, the Gnostic said concisely, and with an unexpected level of reverence. How can we be sure? It could be one of many copies, as Ippo suggested, Jolly said skeptically. Look around you, young scribe. Take measure of its position in this inner sanctum of esoteric study. Take care in which it's been ornately displayed. This is the shroud, I am certain, the Egyptian Gnostic declared confidently. I understand your skepticism, Jolly, but I can feel its strange presence, even from this distance, Alto added, as Raiden glanced around the room, formulating a plan. Fortunately, the few monks present in the library continued their daily studies and were unaware of the presence of the visitors. Sensing an opportunity, Raiden took off his hooded cloak, wrapped it around his fists, and told the others to find a safer way down before abruptly hurtling himself over the balcony edge. As he fell, Raiden grabbed hold of the rope with his wrapped fists extended. He used the cloak as a resistance to control his speed as he slid down until he was close enough to jump on top of one of the shelves. The landing created enough of a clamor to startle the monk, who was sitting at a table near the innermost circle, but Raiden smiled innocently and pressed his finger over his mouth to prompt the annex servant to remain quiet and calm, which he did. Jolly and the Gnostic knew they had to act quickly, and after pulling Alto away from the balcony, he'd never seen anyone do what the captain had just done, they found a stairway to reach the library floor. But before reaching the bottom, an alert annex guard emerged from the doorway and began running up the stairs toward them with a hand bombard pointed up, which immediately held the three men in place. Stop! Who are you? The guard demanded. At that moment, the violent sound of smashing glass echoed around the library. Raiden had cut the rope on which he had slid down, causing the shroud's glass enclosure to swing into the shelf closest to it and shatter. The desecration of the revered relic distracted the guard only briefly, but long enough for the Gnostic to lunge forward and dislodge the bombardier from the guard's grip and shove the man down to the bottom of the stairway. The guard winced and moaned as he struggled to his feet, only to be crushed in the chest by a flying kick from Jolly, who jumped from 4 stairs above. Having dispatched the guard, Jolly, Alto, and the Gnostic rushed over to Raiden, who climbed down the enormous circular shelf structure and was carefully removing the shroud from its broken enclosure. Any doubt of this relic's authenticity faded quickly, as it appeared to affect all of their senses, the most notable of which was the onset of trembling hands and blurred vision. Minutes passed, which seemed like hours, as the group worked to handle the shroud without damaging it, while adjusting to their momentary physical impairments. Once all the shards of glass had been removed, Raiden folded the 14-foot-long linen artifact and handed it for safekeeping to Alto, who was running his hand across volume after volume of uncirculated Lyran literature on one of the shelves within his reach. "I'm sorry, Alto, but we cannot stay," Raiden said, consoling his knowledge-thirsty friend. "I've dreamed for years of standing in this place, and now that I'm here, I'm humbled by the limitations of my imagination," Alto said as he looked above at the stained glass dome. "Do you see how the shroud was aligned with that depiction of a beam of white light emanating from the blackness of space between those 2 moons, or discs?" "Curious, but what of it?" the Gnostic said. "It's a doorway of some kind," Alto replied. Approaching nervously from the periphery, an annex monk asked in disbelief, "What have you done? The prior will not stand for this." "Of course not. He will fall on his knees in all likelihood," Raiden retorted. Not wanting to linger any longer, Raiden and Jolly took measure of the layout of the domed library and speculated with one another on which direction to head. As they discussed a suitable egress, the Gnostic wrapped the rope around his shoulder with the idea that it could prove useful in their exit from the annex. "Hopefully, Corsair stayed out of trouble," the Gnostic said to Raiden. "Doubtless he has. Funny how trouble seems to find him," Raiden joked. None of the prior's timid students seemed willing or capable of providing any opposition, and because of this, Raiden and the others exited unscathed with the shroud in their possession and with the hope that the prior and Captain Tarsh were too far behind to prevent their escape. The whereabouts of Corsair was now foremost on Raiden's mind as he ran down yet another grandiose hallway with rooms on each side, some simply used to store assorted relics, and others seemingly used for the purpose of experimentation, ceremony, or habitation. The Gnostic stopped at the entrance to an eerie room that smelled of lavender. A chain that had been placed on the altar was still pouring out smoke from the burning incense, but the Gnostic did not see anyone present in the darkly lit and cavernous ceremonial room. The rest of the group stood behind the Egyptian as they attempted to get a closer look at what was transfixing their friend. "To whom or what this ceremonial room is dedicated, I cannot imagine," the Gnostic said in a grave tone. The Egyptian had noticed the closed wooden chest adjacent to the altar, but neither he nor anyone else felt compelled to investigate further. "It is too dark. Let us take leave of this foul place," Raiden urged, after grabbing a small candle, its iron holder, and a few matches. The group continued their course, passing dozens more rooms until Jolly noticed a glimmer of moonlight from high above. The ancient ceiling had revealed a crudely carved portal that was ventilating air to the side of the mountain. A recent modification, it was not part of the original Lyrian design. We can get out this way," Jolly posited. "Look, the walk has been chiseled to aid climbing, and if we use the rope that the Gnostic—" "I'm sorry, but I don't think I could get up there. I'm far too fat, clumsy, and stiff in all the wrong places," Alto interrupted, prompting Raiden and the Gnostic to snicker. "Alto's vitality notwithstanding, we have to stay together and trust that we can find our way to the exit we saw on the map," the captain reiterated. Jolly relented, but their discussion underneath the opening had the unexpected effect of alerting their avian companion to their position within the mountain stronghold. Since being left behind at the cave entrance at twilight, Gironi had been using the updrafts and swirling air curtains to glide and circle around the mountain, waiting for his human friends to emerge from their quest. Other than a facious vole hunt to satisfy his hunger, the bird of prey had remained vigilant. Come here, my winged Pasqualin," Raiden said, after he had whistled and waved his arm at the gear falcon now perched on the edge of the carved portal and looking down at the captain. Gironi chirped quizzically before spreading his wings and lurching forward over the edge to fly down and land on Raiden's outstretched arm. I can't believe you found us, Raiden said in amazement. Maybe you can be of some help to us inside the palace. Are you coming with us, or are you going back out there? The captain spoke to Gironi, knowing that his words were not understood. Cack, Gironi sharply uttered while looking directly at the captain. I don't know if that means he wants to come with us or if he wants to chew on my face, Raiden said. I think he wants to come with us, Captain, Jolly suggested as he studied the bird's mannerisms. Gironi then flew over to the young scribe who had offered his arm as a perch. Well, I suppose he's given us his answer. Let's make our way, the captain said as he led the group away. They came to a point where there were two great marble stairways, one very dimly lit and heading down an indeterminable length, and the other coiling up. Resolute in finding a way out, and with their curiosity waning, the truth-seeking adventurers ruled out taking the stairway up in favor of the imposing marble path down, but not without hesitation. Raiden admitted he did not know their exact position within the labyrinthine annex, but retracing their steps back could lead them directly into the clutches of the prior. This dark stairway was the only promising way down that they had encountered. It would have to suffice. Suddenly, the gear falcon chirped a warning. The group stood quietly and then heard what Gironi had heard moments before. Men were descending the coiled stairway, unmistakably Tarshish men, judging by the rampaging clamor that surrounded their movements. Before Raiden and the others could react, sounds of men approaching from a nearby room also could be heard. With only seconds to spare, Prior Napier and Captain Tarsh arrived, the group hid in a small room across from the descending stairway. Raiden, listen to me. My time with you is ended for now, the Gnostic whispered as he grabbed his student's arm. I will create a distraction. Raiden balked. What? It's the only way. You must continue your journey without me. Follow your father's map to find the truth. I believe in you. Your voyage will be the adventure of a lifetime. I must go back to Tarragona for Ippo, the Gnostic passionately explained. You'll get yourself killed if you do this, Raiden argued, fearing for his friend. Do you think I am overmatched? I faced worse odds and have no intention of being captured, the Egyptian monk insisted. I thought you were going to journey with us to find the Chancery, Raiden said. I'm sorry, Raiden, but I was never going to go. Your father has requested my help again. He's in service to Caesar Borgia, son of Pope Alexander, and there's something very important that I must do. With Ippo's assistance, I'm certain I can be successful, the Gnostic enigmatically responded. I'm disappointed, but I understand, old one, Raiden replied. What is your plans? Will you head back to the door? I still have the pendant key. No, Raiden, you must keep that pendant. You might need it if you find the fountains of Rias Kula or any other impenetrable Lyran wonder. I'll head back to that carved-out opening and hopefully draw many of these brutes away from here, the Gnostic answered. He then said his goodbyes to the group. Alto gripped his longtime friend's forearm and stammered what little French he could remember from listening to the Egyptians over the years. Good fortune, mon ami. You well, amigo. Watch over them for me, the Gnostic said. The Gnostic left the room and began stealthily moving down the hallway, occasionally slipping into a room to avoid being seen. Contingent upon the movement of the brutish and haggard crew of Captain Tarsh, his plan was to wait until he reached the portal before loudly announcing his position to the obscurantists' adversaries. This would allow enough time for his ascent up the precarious rock wall and escape through the opening. As he came to his destination, the Gnostic could faintly hear the frustrated prior and Captain Tarsh discussing the shroud and barking out commands to their men. Their arrival in proximity to his location provided an opportunity to execute an even more effective ruse. Yelling out the first of his theatrical deceptions, the Gnostic tried to imply that he was frantically encouraging his friends to climb the wall faster, and he followed this with various impressions of the Pasqualians to give the prior the impression that all of them were escaping through this opening to the outside. Batu, Kazim, Captain Tarsh shouted as he emerged from a room down the hallway. They are down there. The captain pointed to where the Gnostic was positioned. Some of the other members of Tarsh's crew began shouting in rabid excitement and running down the hallway as the Gnostic continued ranting. But to provide the best distraction for Raiden, the Gnostic would have to convince Napier and Tarsh that they had all escaped. The Gnostic focused all of his energy on completing his climb before resuming his taunts. The rope had wrapped around his shoulder. It was heavy, and his range of motion on his left arm was limited by its presence, but he was unwilling to leave it behind. He could now hear the men were moments away from discovering his whereabouts and possibly shooting their hand bombards at him. He was unable to defend himself against it. But fortunately, the Egyptian's light frame and excellent physical condition enabled him to reach the opening and propel himself over the edge to the safety of the outside, just as a couple of shots were fired. A couple of Tarsh's men began climbing toward the surface, but the Gnostic threw a rock at one, which caused him to fall several feet back to the ground. As he continued pelting the remaining men with additional rocks, he realized that the moon and night sky did not provide enough light for them to get a clear shot at him as long as he kept darting around the opening. The prior began cursing out his name, and in response the Gnostic shouted, "You have failed! We have escaped your stronghold with little effort, which is in a way disappointing. I expected it would be far more difficult. My friends are far away now. I've stayed here to see your face finally after these many years, as I once again evade capture. This time it is you, not the curator or the hospitallers or any of your mercenaries. You alone have failed. It is not over, Gnostic. You are just a few feet away, and your friends will be found. We have eyes everywhere," the prior scoffed, posturing confidently in an attempt to conceal his boiling frustration. "Perhaps, but your schemes are crumbling. Soon many will know what you've obscured," the Gnostic replied. "And what is that?" the prior asked. "What came before us? The true shape of the creation, the way the world is divided, and who has made it so in order to rule over it," the Gnostic answered, still moving around the portal unpredictably so as to remain out of clear sight. "Come now, I've not hidden anything they would want to see. Short-sightedness and frailty befalls those you champion. Only a few daring souls like you and me are willing to seek larger truths. We are, in a sense, brothers, only differing in our methods." "Are you joking? Brothers? How many times have you tried to kill me, faithful servant of—" "For whom do you work?" the Gnostic asked. Not knowing how much insider access to the truth the Egyptian really had, the prior answered, "It is a delicate balance that must be struck when you are tasked with protecting the most sensitive layers of the truth for the church. Who will be trusted and who will not? These are not easy decisions to make. I too wonder how much has been hidden from me. You and I were pawns set against one another long ago, but we both want what we do not possess. I must ask, have you thought about whom you serve?" the prior inquired. "The truth is not something that should be hidden in darkness, deep inside mountains or beneath guarded cathedrals of worship, weighed down by centuries of decrees, occulted symbols, and mysterious rituals. To be cleansed of all that is impure, to achieve enlightenment, we must first be given all of the facts. How can we better ourselves if we are kept in the dark about so many things? Are we merely kittens in a basket to be coddled and consoled? Or are we capable of more, beyond simply living, surviving, and dying?" the Gnostic challenged. "What will you do with the shroud?" the prior asked, ignoring the arguments of the Gnostic. "Its place is with the church." Captain Tarsh, not accustomed to listening to such idle fits of dialogue and finding no delectation in it, could abide it no longer and interjected, "Prior, I can assure you this is a ploy. The Egyptian drivels on and on while his accomplices escape." The deep and monstrous rumblings of Tarsh's imposing voice echoed along the walls and marble floors and had the abrupt effect of censuring all those who drew breath in the enclosed area. "They will be heading back to the coast, find their ships, retrieve the shroud, and do what you have done thousands of times before," the prior said to Captain Tarsh, "and your compensation will be tripled." Captain Tarsh took one last look at the Gnostic above, pushing down Kazim's poised bombard, and turned to his other men, grumbling, "The prior has promised us a meal, and then we—" The crew of the Nave Fantama shouted in unison, as indecipherable utterance as a response to their captain's announcement. They left the Gnostic to contemplate the success of his well-executed ruse. He'd done all that he could do to help his friends. It would be up to them to find the subterranean exit from the Lyran Annex and head back to La Pasquala to begin their great voyage. The small candle Raiden had lit was almost reaching its end. The group had descended hundreds, if not thousands, of steps in near darkness, following the stairway's serpentine course as it gradually wound itself lower and lower, deep within the mountain structure. The gems that emitted a light blue glow were not present in this stairway, or, as they would find out, in any of the lower tiers. The group had heard a disturbance at one point, and took a few minutes to investigate the level at which the sounds had originated. But the strange noises ceased, and it was too dark to see anything other than the play of shadows that danced in their imaginations. Turning back to resume their descent, the final flickers of the candle shed just enough light to indicate that they were nearing the bottom of the long stairway. "Did you hear that?" Jolly asked. Rocks crumbling, I think. And then Gironi squawked loudly, an indication that he could see what they could not. It seems minor, but this place is very old. Be mindful of your very step, Raiden replied. The sound of falling rock crashing to the ground nearby was to be expected, but as they finally reached the bottom, the distinctive sound of men scuffling their feet on a ground full of small stones was not. Raiden resisted the temptation to call out to Corsair until he heard the familiar labored breathing of the big Spaniard. On the beaches of Tenerife, Rafaela or Anna Sophia? The captain asked politely. Despite not being able to see his inquisitor, Corsair replied, both, of course. Can someone please explain to my cousin that his memory fails him every time I ask that? Raiden joked. I seem to remember 2 slaps to the face. Ah, yes, they couldn't wait to get their hands on me, Corsair explained, while everyone jeered and laughed. Gironi, you were there. Tell them. The general sense of relief was felt by the group when they were finally reunited, and Raiden spent a few moments explaining their discoveries of the shroud and the annex library and their subsequent success in wresting it from the oblati of the prior's obscurantist order. Where is the Gnostic? Wu asked reticently. The captain could sense his concern and said, we found an opening for use for escape, which is where we found the Gyr Falcon. The monk planned to go back to it while providing the distraction we needed to escape from the prior and his men. He said he had helped my father again, and that he was going back to recruit Ipo. I'm certain he will be fine. Do not fret, my friend. Keep in mind, Wu, the perils and predicaments that he has endured over the years. He is at his best in these circumstances. I've seen it time and time again, Alto added. Wu smiled at Alto and the captain and nodded his head slowly, as if to thank them for the reassurances. We heard a disturbance before. Was that you? The captain asked Corsair. Well, the ox, as Wu so aptly named him, decided to fall through a hole and draw the attention of a curious guard, Corsair answered. No. I found the causeway. It would still be wandering around, if not for me, Sandro argued. Don't forget about Wu. He was amazing, Corsair reminded. He's unbeatable, in fact. We just need to keep him away from the tavern. Raiden asked them if they'd found out anything of interest, which they had not, and whether they had found the way out. Corsair explained that he'd reached a dead end before reversing course along the dreary causeway and following it to this point. Do you still have the torch? Raiden asked his cousin. Yes, but Wu does not have any more matches, and we didn't want to draw any more attention to ourselves. Sandro used his halberd as a blind man would to feel the ground before us. I have a match. We will need light if we are to find our way out, the captain said. Gironi, however, did not need a combustible light source to see a propitious flight path away from their current location. The Gyr Falcon's unparalleled eyesight provided an advantage that was not immediately realized, but Gironi's squawks were persistent and hard to ignore. The group began walking toward their avian friend as Raiden lit the torch, and eventually the artificially engineered Lyrian causeway gave way to a more natural subterranean path, reminiscent of the type of cave floor they used to enter the mountain structure, one that had been carved out by thousands of years of water seepage. Gradually narrowing, the path through the crags became more difficult, especially for Alto, who was not as limber as the others. The portly man took rest against a jagged rock and seemed to be suffering from the level of physical exertion that had been required throughout the day. Raiden encouraged his friend, knowing that their pace needed to quicken if they were going to maintain a safe distance between themselves and Captain Tarsh's men. After each man took a drink of water from Wu Zi's container, the group continues its arduous journey through the caverns. For the next few hours or so, with the Gyr Falcon leading the way, Raiden and the others covered thousands of feet of ground before taking another short rest. Corsair reached his arm out to Gironi, but the bird did not move closer to him, choosing to flap his wings and chirp in an agitated manner. What is it, my winged friend? Corsair asked. As Corsair again tried to move closer, he felt the draft of fresher air, presumably from the outside. Captain, come here. I think we're getting close, the captain determined confidently. If the map is correct, we should be a few miglias away. The men were clearly invigorated by the thought, and they all stood up. As their mood brightened, their pace quickened, and soon they reached the mouth of a cave and saw the first purplish-red rays of sunrise. The men took a moment to stare at the beauty of the Catalonian sky and celebrated their successes with boisterous cheers and strong muscular embraces. The challenge has been met. We have escaped the labyrinth with its greatest prize in hand, Raiden declared. With the shroud and the recovered page of the lost map, the young captain and his men were poised to head back to their hidden ship and set sail on a voyage into the unknown. That concludes the second chapter that I've read, chapter 9. So we did chapter 8 and 9 of this book, The Lost Adventures of Captain Veneti, by Persian scribe, as you know him on YouTube, Jason C. Stiles, the man we met today on the show. If you'd like to purchase this book, and I encourage you to do so, you can do it simply by going to Amazon. And if you'd like to use Jaren's link, it's in the description box in this particular video and in the description box of any of my videos. If you ever want to buy anything from Amazon, he gets a few pennies. I don't receive anything. And if you want to buy this book from Jason, if you don't use Amazon, you can use any of the other links that have been provided. Barnes & Noble is one place you can go. You can also do Lulu. Lulu.com, I think, is the person, the people who've printed the book, as you can see right here. I hope you enjoyed this. It was fun for me. My cats weren't cooperating. Maybe you heard some noise of them shuffling around in the background. I want to thank Jason for being here with me from Wisconsin, telling us a little bit about his story. And I encourage you, as I did earlier in the broadcast, to subscribe to Jason's channel, Persian Scribe. I'm Patricia Steer. This concludes Flat Earth Fiction on Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. Keep it flat and stay adventurous.